Welcome to a quiet story from the banks of the Nile. This is a tale from Egyptian mythology. It follows Sobek, the crocodile god, and a river bend where a village depended on one narrow channel to live through a difficult year. Ancient Egypt formed along the Nile. The river flooded each year, left rich silt, and made agriculture possible in the desert. The Egyptians organized their lives, their calendar, and their beliefs around this cycle, and the presence beneath the water that kept their world working when it mattered. Chapter 1. The River Before Words. Before the rise of the first pharaohs, before the pyramids stood on the Giza Plateau, the Nile shaped everything. It was the spine of ancient Egypt, a single ribbon of life through a vast desert. Every year, between June and September, the river swelled with waters from the southern highlands. The Egyptians called this season Akhet, the inundation. When the water fell, it left dark, fertile mud. That mud made farming possible where rainfall was scarce. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been a long strip of sand. Along its banks, the Egyptians built villages from mud brick and straw. They set fields in long strips running away from the river. They cut simple canals. They lifted water with hands, with pots, and later with the shaduf, a pole and counterweight tool that helped raise water from canals into basins. They planted barley, emmer wheat, lentils, onions, and flax. Papyrus grew in the marshes and became cord, mats, boats, and writing sheets. The Nile was not just a resource. It was sacred. Egyptians believed the river's order reflected the order of the world. They gave thanks to the gods who protected that order. One of those gods was Sobek, the crocodile-headed deity. He represented strength, speed, and the fierce edge of life on the river. He was also linked with fertility and protection. Temples to Sobek in places like Crocodilopolis in the Fayum and Kom Ombo kept sacred crocodiles in pools. Priests fed them meat and sometimes adorned them with gold. When they died, they were mummified and buried with care. Our story takes place at a bend in the river where the Nile split around a broad island. The left channel was shallow and wide, good for fishing and washing nets. The right channel was deep and narrow, good for boats and for feeding irrigation ditches. A small shrine to Sobek stood on the right bank. A simple clay figure faced the current. The Egyptians there left bread, beer, and oil. They asked for safe passage, steady water, and protection from the animals they respected and feared. Most did not realize how much depended on that single deep channel staying open. Sand and silt can shift quickly. A blocked channel can starve fields in weeks. What they did not know is that someone, or something, had been keeping that channel clear for years. One warm morning, with mist on the water, an old boatman poled his skiff along the right channel. He noticed a new sandbar where last year there had been depth. He adjusted course toward a darker seam near the reeds. The water there was cooler and pulled him along. He muttered a quiet thanks to Sobek. Beneath the surface, in dim green water, eyes opened and watched the skiff pass. Sobek had not shown himself to mortals in many seasons. His work had not stopped. The Egyptians of this village trusted the river. They trusted the gods who watched it. That trust would be tested in the year ahead. Chapter 2. The Year Without a Promise. For the Egyptians, the flood was not a guessing game. Priests tracked signs. The heliacal rising of Sirius, Sopdet, near midsummer, signaled the coming inundation. At temples and on island stations, they measured the river with nilometers, stepped shafts or marked pillars that let them read the height of the water. Records of good, average and poor floods shaped taxes, food storage and planting. This year began strangely. Frogs stayed quiet along the marsh edges. Evening air felt drier. Sand traced thin lines into the cracks of the banks. Farmers compared the waterline with last year's marks carved into stone steps. It was lower by the width of a finger. The priest visited from the larger temple downriver. He wrote notes on papyrus and told the Egyptians to keep faith. The flood always came. It was the promise of the Nile. Days grew hotter. The island at the bend seemed larger. More sand showed at low light. Boats scraped bottom in the right channel. Fish were scarce. The old boatman felt the current hesitate in places that had once carried him with ease. He did not talk about it. He watched. He kept his routines. At night, he sat near the Sobek shrine and listened to water slap the steps and move around the pilings. The sound was thinner than usual. The Egyptians brought offerings, bread, dates, beer. They burned incense. In their minds, Sobek and Happy, the god of the inundation, worked together to protect the cycle. They needed both, the living river and the unseen hands that guided it. Below the surface, Sobek moved along the bottom. He felt sand sliding into the mouth of the right-hand tunnel beneath the island. He felt a low shelf of clay that had cracked and fallen into the path. He felt the deeper springs that fed the cold seam slow to a trickle. It was not the first dry year, but this year the hidden veins of water were thin. The priest returned and spoke plainly. Share water with elders. Keep canals clear. Patch the banks. Watch the channel. The Egyptians followed the guidance. They helped one another because survival depended on it. Sobek slid into the old underwater passage under the island. It was tight. The roof scraped his back. He tasted dust in the water. He pushed through to a small pocket where the water was cooler, a sign that a deep source still fed the channel. He listened with his whole body. The river was telling him the old path had shifted more than anyone on the bank could see. The promise of the Nile felt uncertain. Work, not waiting, would decide the year. Chapter 3. The Whispering Ground. By late summer, cracks opened in the mud where footprints had been. The right channel stretched into shallow, warm sheets. The Egyptians walked farther to fetch water. They adjusted canal gates to ration flow field by field. In Egypt's farming year, Akhet, flood, should lead into Pare, emergence and growth. Then Shemu, harvest. When the first season slips, every later step is harder. The old boatman probed the bank with his pole and found a cold patch near the island's flank. Cold meant depth. Depth meant a feed. He waded out, felt a gentle pull, and followed it with his body. He marked the place in his mind. Later, he carried a flat, heavy stone from that spot and set it on the shrine steps. It was a silent note to anyone who understood. Here is a place that still holds. Sobek understood. Inside the tunnel, he found the first jam. Broken clay mixed with tough island roots, all silted together. Breaking it in one blow would choke the surface with mud and make things worse. He worked in small, careful moves. He pressed at the edges, made a finger-wide slit for cold water to pass, held the rest in place with his body weight. He waited for the shift, then pushed again. The young novice at the shrine kept simple records. He scratched the waterline on a post at dawn and dusk. He sketched the island's bite-shaped curve on a scrap of linen. He noticed the cold seam running stronger in the evening than in the morning. He did not know why yet. He only knew something was moving under the surface. In the temples of Sobek, priests fed sacred crocodiles with cuts of meat. In the Fayum, where Sobek's cult was strong, some crocodiles were mummified and buried with linen wrappings and amulets. This respect did not erase fear, it balanced it. The Egyptians knew the river had teeth. They asked those teeth to guard them, rather than harm them. On the fourth night, a piece of the clay shelf in the tunnel sagged and slid. Water pressed through like a sheet. Sobek held the jam from collapsing while the flow cut a smooth channel. Then he let go. On the surface, the old boatman checked his mark and saw the water rise the width of a thumb. It was a small gain. It was enough to change the mood. The novice showed his sketch to the boatman that night. They did not need many words. A shared look and a finger tap on the drawn curve were enough. Knowledge in a water village often moved that way. Simple marks, steady habits. The right channel found a weak pulse again. Not strong, not safe, but clear. Chapter 4. Marks in the Mud. Word spread the way it always did on the Nile, by boat. A trader mentioned a deeper run at the bend. A fisher said his net filled again along a narrow line near the reeds. The village priest returned to see. He stepped into the right channel and felt the cold seam with his calves. He closed his eyes and mapped it with his body, the way Egyptians had done long before any map on papyrus. Sobek's work continued. Deeper in the tunnel, he found a second problem. Wedge-shaped stones locked together, forcing water through a thin gap. Forced water cuts hard and fast. It can carve unpredictably and break a roof. Sobek tested each angle the way a builder tests a wall. He found the keystone that held the rest in place and eased it a fraction, then waited for the pressure to settle before moving it again. On the banks, life kept pace with the season. Women ground grain with handstones and baked flat bread on the hot surfaces. Men repaired nets and boats. Children learned to swim in the shallow left channel. River traffic brought salt, copper tools and news. The Egyptians watched the right channel without looking like they were watching it. That is how you watch a thing you cannot afford to lose. A dust storm crossed the valley one afternoon. Wind carried sand and made the sky a dull sheet. The river surface wrinkled but did not break. The novice walked the bank by touch and felt the cold seam stronger, even in the worst of it. That night, the jam of stones eased with a low grind. The tunnel gave a long sigh the novice could not hear, but which shaped his river the next day. In many temples, priests used nilometers to set offerings and taxes. A flood too low meant shortage and tighter rations. A flood too high could wash out banks and destroy canals. The best flood was even and kind. The bend's right channel began to act like it had been shaped for that kind of water. At dawn, the smell of wet silt thickened, an honest sign of the river doing its work. Boats began to enter the right channel again. The old boatman took his skiff out and let the current do most of the work. He did not smile. He breathed easier. Chapter 5. Teeth and Mercy. Crocodiles still lay along the banks. The Egyptians kept their distance and taught their children to do the same. Fear was not foolish here. It was practical. Even so, reverence shaped behavior. In places like Komombo, reliefs, showed Sobek with a sun disk, an ankh, tied to life and protection. In some periods, Sobek was linked with Ra, the sun god, as Sobek Ra, a sign that a fierce force could also carry light and order. One hot afternoon, a young herder stepped into the shallows to pull a lamb back from deeper water. A low shape approached under the surface. It moved between the lamb and the deep, nudged the animal toward shore, and slid away. The herder said nothing when he got home. Not every truth becomes a story. Some truths become a habit. A softer step at the bank, a calmer look at the water. Beneath the island, Sobek found a third danger, a slit in the tunnel wall where water leaked into a dead pocket underground. Left alone, it could widen, create a sink that pulled sand and collapse the bank later. He wedged his armored back against the slit and held there. Silt settled over him. The mud hardened in the shape of his body. He became part of the repair. On the bank, the novice widened his map. He shifted from a small linen scrap to a board covered with cloth. He added arrows to show direction, dates to show change. In Egypt, maps were rare but powerful tools. They meant someone could see a problem before it showed itself in a broken canal or an empty jar. The right channel's rhythm improved. Skippers still took care, but rope pulls gained a steady beat. The wake behind sterns took on a clean shape. You can often see recovery before you can measure it. You see it in the way a reed bends, in the way mud takes a footprint, in the sound a hull makes when it passes a post. The priest did not call the village together to declare victory. He sat on the shrine steps, counted birds landing in reeds, and left oil and bread. Gesture matters in thin times. It keeps attention clear. Sobek slipped from the sealed slit and drifted along his earlier work. The stone wedge sat quiet. The root tangle was gone. The clay jam was now a smooth throat. He felt something like satisfaction, the simple sense that a task had been done correctly. Crocodile mummies, housed in desert catacombs, still hold amulets for safe passage. The Egyptians made them because they believed order must be preserved in life and in death. The right channel was, in its way, the same belief written in water. Chapter 6. The Hidden Currents. By the full moon, the right channel pulled with confidence. It was not a flood, but it was reliable. The Egyptians widened field ditches and rotated flow in shifts. Morning for one set of plots, afternoon for another, night for a third. In basin irrigation, timing is everything. A field that drinks at the right hour can survive a hard season. The novice's map grew into a community tool. He kept it near the shrine, covered from sun and dust. Fishermen added small marks. Boatmen noted where poles struck bottom. Children learned to trace the cold seam with a finger. Knowledge shared became a kind of offering. Sobek ranged upriver and found a wide stone shelf where the current spread too thin before dropping off. In rich years, it made a pleasant ripple. In lean years, it stole water to sun and wind. Night after night, he pressed at a low point near anchored roots until the surface cut a narrow groove and held together longer. At dawn, fishermen noted a lower, smoother sound in the water there. They smiled without working out why. At the bend, a boy slipped from a skiff and vanished into the deeper seam. Panic rose. Before anyone could cast a line, the boy popped up in the calm eddy behind the bite-shaped curve. The Egyptians pulled him out, soaked and coughing. Those who knew the river understood a simple fact. The current had been shaped to send a body to safety. They did not say it out loud. They looked at the shrine. In the city, the priest showed his notes to temple scribes. He did not present a miracle. He described a pattern, a deep channel that weakened, small signs of recovery, steady improvement. The scribes sent word upriver to watch similar bends, and downriver to manage grain storage with care. The empire relied on many villages like this one. Clear eyes at the waterline kept granaries full. Sobek inspected one more weak point near the tunnel mouth. A low arch had been thinned by years of fast water. If the flood rose too quickly, it might crumble. He rolled a heavy stone along the bottom with his head and neck. He braced it under the arch and packed mud around it with his tail. It was a simple prop. It could hold the weight even at peak flow. When thin green showed in the fields, the Egyptians allowed themselves to breathe. It was not abundance, it was survival. In hard years, survival is enough. Chapter 7. The Late Flood. The flood came late. The first signs were subtle. A brown line curling along the far bank, bits of reed drifting from upstream, a smell like turned earth and distant rain. The water rose hand by hand, overtopping the novice's earlier marks on the post. He cut a new mark with his knife and kept watching. In Egypt, the 3 seasons, Akhet, flood, Pere, emergence, Shemu, harvest, controlled almost everything. Planting had to wait for the right height. A flood too small meant short rations. Too large meant broken banks and lost soil. Even and steady was best. Reports from nilometers upriver and downriver let scribes set expectations for taxes and temple offerings. This year's message was cautious. Later than usual, smaller than average, but reliable. At the bend, the right channel took the rising water without tearing at the bank. The bite-shaped curve held its form. Field inlets swallowed water smoothly. Egyptians worked in crews to shore weak places with brush and mud. They opened and closed gates in sequence. This was the practical side of faith. Do the work that matches the prayer. Under the island, Sobek swam the tunnel at full flow to test it. The prop under the arch held. The cleared jam spread the pressure. The seal slit did not drink. He nudged the mouth into a tiny bend to keep the force off a soft pocket on the bank. He shaped small shelves where silt would lay down, feeding future floods into the canals. None of this was dramatic. All of it mattered. On the banks, Egyptians laughed and cried as the flood peaked. Children splashed at the edge. Parents watched for sudden eddies and pulled them back from dangerous spots. The old boatman poled into the right channel and then set the pole aside. The skiff carried him without effort. He set his palm on the warm wood and let the sound of strong water fill his head. At night, the flood made a low sound you felt in your ribs. Windows stayed open to let it in. It washed fear out of corners. It said the simple thing every family needed to hear: you will eat. When the water began to fall, the fields wore a thin film of pale brown silt. In days, green pushed through. Work filled the village. In hard years, work is the best song. In city records, scribes wrote that the flood was late and small, but even and kind. Damage was light where canals were tended. Chapter 8. The secret comes to shore. When the river settled back to its ordinary level, the village changed. Faces eased. Voices lifted a little. The old boatman's limp faded with rest. The novice wrapped his map in clean cloth. sealed it in a jar with dry leaves, and set it in a niche in the shrine wall. He was not hiding it. He was keeping it for the next time the river grew strange. The priest promised to report the village's careful work to officials downriver. He would speak of shared water, clear canals, and measured fields. He did not know that a god's back had held a slit closed under silt. He did not need that part to be true for his report to be useful. He only needed to say what the Egyptians had done right, so others could copy it. One evening, the old boatman brought a fish to the water's edge. He did not plan a ritual. He wanted to say thank you in a way no words could confuse. The surface changed. It grew thick for a moment. 2 eyes broke the waterline, watched him, and sank. The fish was gone. The boatman stood, wiped his hands, and exhaled. That was enough. From the steps, the novice saw the boatman kneel and stand. He did not see the eyes. He still felt the right next step. He took a child to the bank and showed her how to read a rope's sway, a reed's bow, the way mud holds a heel. He said the bite-shaped curve was a safe place if you knew how to use it. She nodded. Simple lessons, strong future. Sobek drifted in the deep seam and watched the shapes above. A dog came to drink. A skiff crossed without scraping. The sky turned from copper to blue to dark. The river set into its steady pace. Ordinary again. Ordinary is valuable when you have lived months without it. The Egyptians did not turn Sobek's work into speeches. They turned it into habits. Clean canals, careful maps, shared water, a respectful glance at a shrine when they passed. They taught their children to trust the river and to help it work. That was the right way to carry a secret. When dawn came, the old boatman took his skiff to the bite-shaped curve and dipped his fingers in the cool line. He said a word in his head. It was not a god's name. It was not a request. It was thanks. Beneath him, Sobek slid past the low arch he had propped with a stone. He did not pause. His work held. The channel was ready for what the next year might bring. The Egyptians would wake, work, and eat. They would check the rope on the post and the mark on the steps. And the crocodile god would keep the hidden currents honest, unseen, and enough. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like the video and subscribe to Legendary Sleep for more gentle myths and legends. May your night be quiet, your breath steady, and your rest deep. I'm wishing you a legendary sleep